Hey all, this is Unfiltered Curiosity. This is Jesse. Today we have Mom on the podcast. Mom, give me just a little bit of a background, where you came from, your lifestyle growing up, that type of background.
I grew up in a small town, 40,000 or less. I was raised by pretty much a farmer's daughter, very conservative. She was a single mother of 4 girls, so she was very reserved.
Okay. So you came from a conservative background. So with that, how do you feel that impacted when I came out as trans? Well, actually, I guess let's even back up further than that. When I came out as lesbian, how do you feel your background impacted that?
Well, when you came out as a lesbian, I felt comfortable with that because my sister is also a lesbian and she had came out already and I was comfortable with that with her. So for you to come out, it wasn't something brand new.
So you didn't have any kind of concerns with it just because it wasn't new. It was something you had
Right.
already been exposed to, so it wasn't anything different, essentially. So were you caught off guard or surprised in any way when I came out as lesbian?
Not really.
Mark and I talked a while back that there's this weird expectation I feel that parents have that their kids have to kind of conform to a traditional lifestyle, whether that is we just expect our kids to come out straight and they're going to get married to the opposite sex and have kids and procreate. Did you have that expectation for your kids, or did it not matter for your kids?
Really put a whole lot into it. With you being the youngest, we hadn't really gotten there that far. You were always very much of a tomboy, as they would put it. You enjoyed hanging out with boys versus girls. They were boring to you. So you weren't the real frilly type girl anyway.
So Mark had the question for me. He asked, do you feel your family was still coping with the fact and accepting the fact you were lesbian when you came out as trans? Do you feel that was the case? What was running through your head that day when I did come out to you?
I guess the first thing that went through my head was I was not familiar with trans. It was something very different for me. I was much more comfortable with you just being a lesbian than being trans because I was familiar with that.
When I showed you the video to help explain, do you feel that helped you understand it?
Yes, it did. What it did was it made me rethink your life. And there were several flags that showed up that made me realize that was more you as a transgender than a lesbian. I remember when we went to Disneyland and you must have been 2nd grade, probably, maybe 3rd.
Something I was pretty young, yeah.
Uh-huh. And you always wore these plaid shirts and you buttoned them all the way up and were so proud of it. And you had short hair, very short, layered hair. And when we were giving our order, the waitress said, "What does the little boy want as far as your drink or something like that?" And you just beamed. You just smiled so proudly. And I just answered a root beer and I just went with that. But we all knew who they were talking about. You were over there beaming and just things that came more to my mind after I'd watched that video. That video was a very well put video, I felt, and very open. And it does bring out things he had went through in his life and how he felt. And it made me look back on your life and I could see a lot.
I don't remember that story at Disneyland, but do you feel the rest of the family was caught off guard by that at any point? Or was that kind of a norm that they were just, Jesse gets mistaked as a boy all the time, no big deal?
I would have to say half half. Your immediate siblings were all, one was like, that's just a phase. The other 2 older ones were, not sure what to think. But my sisters, 2 of them said, yeah, don't you remember? One was with us in Disneyland and one said, don't you remember this? And would tell me stuff. And I'd be like, oh, yeah, that's right. And there were times at school, they were putting all the girls in one line and all the boys in one line. And this mother kept putting you in the boy line because you had your plaid and were buttoned all up and short hair, a hat probably at the time. And the other one knew you were a girl. So she kept putting you back. And it was just, they would bring it to my attention of, I can kind of see that because look how I was way back when. Way pre-puberty.
So you were pretty accepting right off the bat. I mean, to me, there was no red flags of, oh, she's going to disown me. I'm not going to have a mom. I'm not going to have a family. And I know you and I have been really close growing up. Do you think reflecting on those times helped kind of support that? Was there any point in time that you were like, I don't know if I can handle this?
No, I think when you initially first came out, I it was very new to me. I wasn't as familiar with it, and I was kinda like, "Hmm, how am I gonna deal with this?" But I knew I would deal with it. There was no way I wouldn't. I knew I would for you. I would deal with it, period.
Dealing with it as in making it work with the
Yes.
family, like you were gonna keep everything together, kinda labeled as our puzzle piece, and I think that's great because it fits perfect. Dad has become very accepting now, but at first I know it was tough for just that side of the family in general. What was that first reaction of having that conversation with dad? I don't know if he had any concerns when I came out as lesbian. I mean, at this point, it's not something everybody understands, and a lot of people think in order to support it, you have to be able to understand it. Did he have any kind of concerns that you had to kind of smooth over?
I remember when I first approached him regarding it, I told him how you had approached me and what you told me and stuff. And I approached him pretty much just telling him what you and I had interacted with, telling him my side. And he was very quiet, which he's kind of like that. He's one that you have to plant the seed.
Let him marinate?
Yeah, he didn't really say a whole lot, and then I think we talked, a few more times, and it got to he just said, "I don't understand it, but I'm not gonna lose him as a child."
So from the get-go, dad was like, "I'm not gonna lose my kid over it."
Right, right. If I have
Okay.
to conform somewhat or I don't know what to do or how to think about it, but I am not gonna lose him over it.
That's interesting because over the years, there's been lots said about different family members and what other family members had said. And I mean, it was definitely rocky for a little while with certain people. And everybody moves at their own pace, so I would never hold it against anybody. But I remember there was a time dad and I had sat there talking, and he said, there was a time that I thought we weren't going to have this relationship that we have now, where we can ask questions. And I think our family's a little bit more, I guess, behind the times is a good way to put it. The reason Mark wanted to start this podcast was because he felt he was behind the times to a lot of things happening in the world and didn't understand them and wanted to learn more about them. And I feel like our family has a little bit more understanding of things happening in the world, whether they grasp it right away or whatnot. I have lots of friends that are part of the community that you guys have met, and actually, I feel like become pretty close with some of them. And those are people I don't think any of you would have really sought out to become friends with. So, do you feel our family has become more accepting?
I think so, for your sake. And you have a good level head on your shoulders. So it's, if you're like, hey, this is a good guy, okay, yeah, sure, we'll give him a try, and we'll get along with them.
Yeah, there's only one friend that was not my friend that I know had come over, had made little bit of ripples. But even with that, I still feel like you guys welcomed everybody with open arms. And Mark can attest to that. He said it before that the first time he came over, you guys just asked, "Hey, how long have you known Jesse?" I feel like with our family, we've always had the more the merrier type
Yeah.
mentality when we have events or even Christmas. I know with older siblings, some of their friends have just become part of the family and have joined Christmas some years. Going back to when I was younger, looking back, you see how it all lines up and it makes sense. If being trans was more well known when I was younger, is that something you would have maybe thought of? Obviously, not promoted on to me, but maybe thought of, and it wouldn't have come as such a shock later?
Possibly. And I think maybe in the back of our heads, it was kind of sitting there anyway, because I mean, from very young, I remember you playing with your cousins and you would go by Jeffrey. How you came up with that name, I have
Jeffrey.
no idea. I have no idea, but you always were Jeffrey. And we'd always say, well, why don't you switch it to this or that? And no, you had to be Jeffrey. And you kind of stuck with that. And I remember you having a baby doll, and you must have only been first grade max, and you were holding the baby doll, patting it on the back like you were burping it or something. And I said, you're going to be a really good parent when you grow up. And I watched what I said because you were very much a tomboy. You did not always want to be the girly girl or anything like that. So I was always very careful with how I said it. And I said, you're going to be a very good parent. And you turn around and look at me and you said, I'm going to be a good dad, aren't I?
Yeah, I remember you telling me that when I was younger.
And you were very young then. I mean, you were very young, so you would surprise me, and I kinda took that back, so when it all did come out and I watched that video kinda brought all those memories back throughout different
Yeah.
times of your life.
I think eventually it would be cool to make my own video for that. When I found it, it was as kind of a sense of community, I guess, because well, we grew up in a conservative state in a small town, and for the most part, I feel people keep to themselves. They don't really pry too much. If it doesn't go with their beliefs, they kind of just stay away or they veer off versus being extremely hateful. You always have the odds of one or two here or there.
Right.
But that video, it gave me that sense of community of, okay, I'm not alone in this. I'm not just some weirdo like everybody's been saying. It was nice to find that video, and I also feel like it helped communicate how I was feeling as well. And it was cool to, as much as everybody hates labels nowadays, it was cool at the time to be able to have a label to be like, hey, this is who I am versus, yeah, I'm Jesse, but this is who I am as a person. And this helps explain to everybody why it is so important to me to switch. Or I still don't think a lot of people in our family understand it. I think they've just learned to accept this is Jesse and Jesse's going to do what Jesse wants to do.
Yeah.
So I don't think a lot of people understand a lot of it. But do you have any questions as far as transition, anything that popped up early times?
I know some of the older relatives have at first they were very stubborn in their ways and they would just, they don't want, especially when you changed your name. They really did not want to accept you with that name. It was very hard. And your dad had a very hard time with that too. He tried, but he had a very hard time, but he finally I don't know, I think something just clicked one day and it went from there. And but he was embarrassed of himself one time when you had friends come over and he opens the door and they're all like, "Is Jesse there?" And he kind of turned around and looked at me like, "Jesse who?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, he's in the garage." And so he let him in and they went into the garage. And afterwards, he was so embarrassed. He goes, "I just cannot believe I did that." He goes, I was so embarrassed for himself.
Huh? I didn't know that. I didn't realize it in the time of, hey, this is a big change of, I mean, you're changing your title when you change your name, right? I've been called this for years. And at the time, especially I think being teenager, you kind of have that teenager angst anyway. And then
Mhm.
when you don't fit the norm, there's a little bit more that tags onto it of I still deserve respect and you have that little bit of demandingness for it.
Right.
But I understand how hard it is to be able to switch. I mean, even for a simple factor that is traditional, one of my teachers got married 2 years into me having her in high school, and to have that switch in middle of high school was a big change that I had. That was my first understanding of what you guys were going through when I changed my name, is that I had to change and call her what she wanted to be called because that was now
Right.
her legal name.
Yeah.
And so that was, I think, something that was definitely rough, I guess, on my side. It was a realization of this is what my family and friends have been dealing with. This is their struggle they've been dealing with. And then also being the only trans person that we really know and up in our area, my one friend that I do have that goes by they, them, to me, that was the first struggle that I've ever had to deal with pronouns. When you get into the non-binary, even I struggle with the pronouns, whereas lots of people, they assume you're part of the community, so they assume you don't have that struggle. I'm at year 12 now of being out as trans, so I think now I can just see your guys' struggle from your end because I've had to do it on my own. Did me changing my name, did that hurt? My name had a lot of thought into it. It was family names. It was all my aunt's middle names put together. So with having that background with my dead name, did that hurt when I switched that because you had put all the thought and effort into it?
I wouldn't say it hurt. It was kinda like, we found the perfect name, and he changes it. But a typical kid kinda does that. But when kids turn 18, you have to let them do their own thing. And that even though, you weren't 18 at the time, but we kinda knew we had to let you do it. You wanted to change your name, so you did, and it didn't really
It was
hurt.
just di
It was just different, kinda.
Did you was there, especially with siblings, was there any, puzzle piecing on your end there of trying to help with the understanding or maybe they had struggles on their side of maybe friends asking them because their friends didn't understand and they didn't know how to talk about it?
I was pretty open, and I think there might have been a few of your siblings' friends that were pretty close to us, and they would make comments here and there. Well, I didn't realize he was trans, but they felt comfortable with me in asking the questions, and I would just say, "Yeah, he came out, and this is what he feels."
Was there ever a time that you didn't know the answer to something and you had to either A, I guess, look it up on your side or ask me? I don't feel you and I really ever sat down and had a question and answer about it all. It's always just been there. But I think a lot of that just goes into the relationship that we have.
I know if I did have questions, I'd usually ask you, and you'd always tell me. You're always very forthcoming with stuff like that, and if I asked, I better be prepared to get an answer because if I'm not, I'm gonna get it regardless, if I
True.
ask. And so you're always very forthcoming and would tell me, and so I kinda went with that. If I had questions, I'd ask you.
Was there anybody in our family that right off the bat, they were like, go you, go Jesse?
There was probably a handful of relatives that were, "Yeah, that makes sense. I can see that from Jesse when you came out." And then there's other ones that just didn't know how to deal with it, so they just were trying to deal with it but didn't know how. But you had probably a handful that were very, "Hey, I can see that. That sounds right."
Did you have a lot of explaining with that? Did you have to explain what it meant to be transgender?
I guess there was one that was older, and he would not be one that would interfere at all. He's not one that's gonna call you out on it by any means, but you were close to him, and he wanted to understand you, and he, I think, just one day asked, "Is he like your sister?" Which, at that time, my sister had came out, he knew she was gay, and I said, "Well, not really." I said, "He is more transgender," and he looked at me and said, "Well, what's that?" I said, "Well, he identifies as male." And he looked at me and, "Okay." And that's all that was ever said. And he just went with it. I mean, but he's the one that you'd be in driving around with him and he would laugh because you would throw a dart and it would go and hit the inside of the windshield as he's driving down the road and he'd be laughing. So, I mean, you always had boy toys. There was a bow and arrow and he would just laugh.
I feel like most of my baby pictures, I'm in pretty gender neutral stuff.
Mhm.
Did you guys start letting me choose things from an early age? Or was there ever like a shift, I guess, in I was playing with girl toys and all of a sudden I wanted boy toys?
No. You'd always love to sit there and watch football with your dad or basketball instead of play with dolls. You had your moments of playing with dolls if everybody else was, then you would. But you were much more into boy type things. You wanted to make things, create things. You did like crafts because you like to create stuff. I don't know if you remember or not, but we'd always say we had a boy. He just didn't have the plumbing because you did. You had a personality of a boy.
Recently we had somebody come visit us and said that they heard these stats. And I've mentioned this in a past episode, but there's research that they've done where they'll interview these people and say they interview me that my brain when I was little would align more with the boys versus the girls, whereas a female would align with the females. And it shows in some of the studies that they've done that it's not a choice, it's just how the brain operates. And that's where I think a big misconception with a lot of people is with transgender. A lot of people don't understand that there's a difference between your sex and your gender. When you
Right.
look up sex and gender, sex is what is physically there in between your legs, the physical parts you have. And your gender is where it comes from your mind, which is why people say this is how I identify. So it was cool to just hear that there are stats out there that your brain actually does align with the gender you want to be. That was kind of a cool stat to find out.
I could see that. Yeah, that would be.
And especially going back to look at pictures, I think I'm pretty gender neutral dressed for the most part. I can only count a handful of times the amount of times that I was in pink as a child. There was that few years that I really gave being a girl a shot. How do you think the family perceived that? Do you think that kind of threw more of a curveball for them?
Maybe because you were very good looking, popular, a good personality. So I think when you did go transgender, you cut all that hair off, and they just a few of them I think almost choked because they couldn't believe you'd do that. Because women having long hair is always a beautiful thing to men usually.
It's funny you say that because the older I get, the more I notice the older women get, the shorter their hair gets for the most part.
We don't want to have to put that much time into it.
Right, but it's not when I was little, that was the stigma that I learned was if you were a girl, you had long hair. Whereas now you don't have to have long hair to be a girl, and you don't have to be lesbian to have short hair because those were false stereotypes. Do you think that
Right.
me having the long hair and me dressing more feminine for those, what, 2, 3 years, do you think that confused people more than if I had just stayed boyish?
Yeah, I think so. I think you gave it your all, but you were just kind of a unguided missile. You didn't know what you would do. You'd do stuff and I'd be like, yeah. I think once you figured out you were transgender and what one you were going to, you seemed much more guided. You knew what you were shooting for. You knew what made sense.
Yeah. When I came out to you guys, I think I was 15 at the time.
That
Your
right? Yeah.
guys' call was to wait till I was 18 for any legalities of name change or anything like that. Would you do any of that differently now?
Well, some people in the family were like, this is just a phase. It's people he's hanging around with or whatever. And we figured that would give you time because you would have a couple years to really put roots down and figure out, yeah, this is what I want. And I think to do it again, I'd probably stick by that again because it does make you, by the time you did it, you knew what you wanted. There was no question. And it had been long enough, we knew also.
I wouldn't even say you guys really made me hold back. Legality wise, I understood, okay, I can't change my name till I'm 18. That made sense to me. But I still went by Jesse, even though that wasn't my legal name. And I remember starting at jobs and it not being my legal name. It was kind of weird. There was one other person ahead of me that was trans, but other than that, there was no trans people in our area. I will say people started realizing what it was to be trans, so they started coming out right around the same time, which is where a lot of those videos helped. So is it weird having to have a different name that got called out when they did roll call? That was one of those awkward moments. You have to deal with that weird name change situation. But to me, it made sense to wait until I was 18 for that legality move. And truthfully, you guys didn't prolong it too much. Because with where we were at, you had to have it in the paper for 4 weeks or something ridiculous ahead of time. So we started that before my actual birthday because it was 2 weeks after my birthday that I legally changed my name. And I remember you and one of my cousins being there for that, and you two being there was a huge supporter. I got to skip the school for the day 'cause I was so ready for it and made it more special. I got a question from one of my siblings at one point. She was pretty blunt about it. And I'm sure when I ask you the question, you'll know which sibling. But she asked me, are you gonna raise your kids as no gender or are you gonna raise them as a gender and just let them do whatever? It caught me off guard because I didn't expect her to be as blunt with it. That was less blunt than how she put it. But if my kid were to come out as trans, I would still try to follow similar to what you and dad did, legality wise. Give a few years, make sure it is something that they want. It's not permanent. There are ways to undo, but it's going to be much harder to undo if they want to undo.
Right.
So, do you have any questions?
I remember you young. I bet you were 4, 5, maybe. And you would come up to me and you would say, Mommy, am I a boy or a girl? And I'd say, Honey, God made you extra special. You're a girl. And you would start crying and walk away. You were not just crying a little bit, you were full-fledged crying. And I'd kind of look at whoever was around like, did I say something wrong? Flags like that would pop back into my head like, yeah, okay, I can see that. From very early start, you would make comments like that. And you're proud. Then they would put you in a boy line. To you, that was a neat thing.
Yeah. One thing I wish was a little different. One, I hate stereotypes. You know me. You give me a stereotype, and if I can break it, I will. Being trans, you grow up hanging out with, if it's female to male, you're hanging out with females, right?
Right.
I had a lot of female friends. I didn't really, I mean, I had a lot of guy friends, but that was when I was really young. When I got older, I just clicked more with females. However, when you are transitioning, you become that weird person. You don't get to do sleepovers because now you're considered a guy, so you can't have sleepovers with the girls. But then, from your guys' standpoint, I can't have sleepovers with guys because I'm still technically a girl. Were sleepovers and stuff like that, do you feel like that was harder to navigate with me versus my siblings?
Maybe a little bit. I mean, it was different. I remember you did have some sleepovers with a few of the gals, and I remember their moms clarifying that you were a girl, it was okay, and comments like that. But yeah, once you transitioned and went over, you didn't have a lot of sleepovers.
Yeah, I didn't. Well, I kind of got excluded from some things in some ways. And I don't think it was on purpose by any means, but there would be times like our craft days. Most of the craft days, all women in our family. I remember going through my transition. One of those days came up. I was like, oh, I want to go. And I don't remember who said it, but I remember a phrase came out and they were like, well, but you're a boy now. You have to go hang out with the boys. And so there was almost, I don't even know how, if there's a word for it. I would say almost a reverse discrimination. I wasn't allowed to hang out with the girls now because I was a boy.
That I think some of that was your siblings and your cousins not know how to accept it. I know we had gotten to my sisters and I do weekends together, and I had gotten down to at first we would take our spouses, and then it got to where we didn't take our spouses and we called it the girls' weekend. Well, then it we just started saying it's the sisters' weekend because it's the majority of us are the sisters. And so
Yeah.
then finally started just saying instead of it being girls' weekend or a girls' craft, or we'd just say it's craft day, family craft day, or things like that. We would try to reword it so it wouldn't leave you out because you did. You'd like to make stuff.
Yeah, because it was the first craft day you guys did without me. You guys were all having fun crafting down and sewing and scrapbooking and doing all this stuff without me. And I remember coming in from the shop one time going to go to the bathroom, and I remember looking through the window being like, that's fun because all the guys were doing was chilling in the shop watching TV. I was like,
Yep.
I don't want to do this. This is
I'm
boring.
watching some sport or something. Yeah, you wanted to get right in there, and you did. You got right in. Your aunt had a stash pile of stuff, and you were in there going through all of it. Can I do this? Can I do this? Can I do this? And she was like, sure.
Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong, I like my sports and stuff too, but at the time I wanted something more social, which was crafting, and it was something that our family had always done.
Right.
Alrighty, well, this concludes unless you have any more questions.
I don't think I have any questions.
Alrighty, you guys can all find us on TikTok at Unfiltered Curiosity. You can find us on Instagram at unfiltered_curiosity. You can find us, or you can email us any kind of ideas, topics. Maybe you have a comment and you want to share your story. You can also send that into us on email at unfilteredcuriosity2@gmail.com. You can also listen on Unfiltered Curiosity 20-40 on YouTube. So we also have other places you can utilize to listen to. It doesn't have to be just on Spotify, but please reach out to us. Give us those direct messages and those topic ideas, or if you have any questions, if you're on your journey and you just want to share your story, that's also super cool. I know Mark can attest to this too. I know he wants to hear your guys' stories. He wants to see who we're being able to impact, who's listening to what we're talking about. Mom, thank you for coming on this week and being our guest for the week.
Thank you for having me.
Anytime you can come back. Maybe we'll do a podcast one day with you, Mark, and maybe we'll bring Peyton on.
Sure.
But we hope you come back. We hope you guys are continually listening, and we'll see you next week.